Hello. My name is Harper, and I want to read an excerpt from Dreaming in the Dark, Sex, Magic, and Politics by Starhawk. This is Appendix A. The Burning Times, notes on a crucial period of history. I feel as though this is extremely relevant for what is happening today. And it is September 23rd, 2025. If you believe some of the rumors on the internet, it's the day of the rapture, but instead of that, I'm reading history of the burning times. So let's begin. She is afraid. Her own fear has a smell more pungent than the needles of pine that crush beneath her feet on the forest path. The earth streams after spring rain. Her own heart is louder than the lowing of cattle on the common. The old woman carries a basket of herbs and roots she has dug. It feels heavy as time on her arm. Her feet on the path are her mother's feet, her grandmother's, her grandmother's grandmother's. For centuries she has walked under these oaks and pines, culled the herbs and brought them back to dry under the eaves of her cottage in the common. Always the people of the village have come to her. Her hands are healing hands. They can turn a child in the womb. Her murmuring voice can charm away pain, can croon the restless to sleep. She believes she has fairy blood in her veins, blood of the old race who raised standing stones to the open sky and built no churches. The thought of the church makes her shiver. She remembers her dream of the night before. The paper pinned to the church door. She couldn't read it. What had it been? The proclamation of a witch hunt? She passes her hands over her eyes. These days the sight is a trouble. Her dreams are haunted by the faces of women in torment, their sleepless eyes, the lids forced open as they walk up and down night after night, weak from hunger, their bodies shaved and displayed to the crowd, pricked deep to find the evidence they call devil's marks, then taken for the private amusement of the jailers. And they were mild here in England, where witches were only hung. She thought of the tales whispered at meetings of Germany and France, of devices to crush bones and tear limbs out of their sockets, of veins ripped apart and blood spilling on the dirt, of flesh charred as flames rose about the stake. Could she keep silent under that, or would she break? Confess to anything, name anyone they wanted as her fellow witch? She doesn't know. She hopes she will never know. The old woman makes a banishing sign with her left hand and walks on. Perhaps the paper in the dream was something else entirely, but the bad smell clung to it. Enclosure? Were they going to divide the common land, build fences, tear down little cottages like her own? She feels a stab under her bodice and sits down, hardly able to breathe. Yes, that was it. What will she do? Who will speak for her or take her in? She has no husband, no children. Once the village would have protected her, but now the priests have done their work well. The sick fear her even when they come to her for help. The villagers fear each other. The bad harvests, the rents, the always increasing price of food. There are too many rats scratching at the same little pile of grain, and the priests and the preachers are always at them to scratch at each other. Still, there were uprisings in the west and in the north against enclosure. There could be risings here. She turns and looks deep into the forest. For a moment, she is tempted to turn around, to follow the pathway further than she ever has been. Some have said the old race still lives in the forest's hidden center. Would they shelter her? Or would she find the camps of the masterless, the tinkerers, the outlaws, those who had been driven, like herself, off the land? Would it be a freer life under the trees? Could they use a healer? And would they someday swarm out of the woods and wastes an army of the dispossessed to tear down the fences of the overlords, the manor houses, the churches, to reclaim their own land for freedom? She is still, but finally she shoulders her basket and starts off back towards the village. Young Jonet at the mill is near her time, and the old woman knows it will be a difficult birth. She will need the herbs in this basket. She is afraid, but walks on. We have always survived, she tells herself. We will always survive. She repeats it over and over, like an incantation. We survive still. In the culture of estrangement, for how much longer, no one knows. Yet to change that culture intelligently, we must understand it, trace its roots, know its history, not because estrangement is the lineal descendant of one particular historical event or time, but because the past is still alive in the present. The drama of estrangement is a long and complex story, and perhaps it can never be fully retold. To tell it fully would be to retell all history. But at least we can raise the curtain on the first scene of what may well be the last act, and look closely at the old woman's period, the 16th and 17th centuries, a time when Western culture underwent crucial changes that produced a particular brand of estrangement that characterizes the modern world. Two descriptions are better than one, states Gregory Bateson in Mind and Nature, because, quote, the combination of diverse pieces of information defines an approach of very great power to what I call the pattern which connects, end quote. When we look at the 16th and 17th centuries with binocular vision, we can see in sharp relief the many facets of our present drama. One eye gives us the view with which we are familiar. We see the period of the Renaissance and Reformation as the great flowering of art, science, humanism, a time when constricting chains of dogma were thrown off, a time of questioning and exploration, of the birth of new religions and the reevaluation of corruption in old institutions, a time of discovery and enlightenment. But close that eye and look through the other, the left eye, the witch's eye. And the 16th and 17th centuries are the burning times, when persecution of witches and of women as witches reached its peak. The times of terror and torture, the times of the rack and the strappado, of forced confessions of children used as witnesses against their mothers, of public death at the stake. With binocular vision, the question that stands out is not, why did they persecute witches? Church history is a history of persecution. The witch burnings were not an isolated phenomenon. They must be seen in the context of centuries of blood and terror. For the Jews, the Middle Ages were a period of continually escalating restrictions, humiliations, expulsions, and wholesale slaughter. In Spain, the forcibly converted Marranos, who continued to practice Judaism secretly, were tortured by the inquisitors and, if unrepentant, were burned like witches at the stake. Christian heretics, both individuals and whole communities such as the Waldenses and Albigenses, were also victims of the rack, of the sword, and at the stake. Rosemary Reuther points out in New Woman, New Earth, Sexist Ideologies and Human Liberation that, quote, many of the ideas later projected upon witches, such as nocturnal orgies and child sacrifice, were directed by the Inquisition against heretics. The image of the Jew as a demonic alien was similar in many ways to that of the witch. The Jew was seen as the devil worshipper, equipped with horns, claws, and tails, riding on a satanic goat. Like the witch, the Jew was believed to steal the Eucharist and to perform other blasphemous caricatures of Catholic rituals. End quote. The witch persecutions were, however, different in several important ways from persecutions of Jews and heretics. To begin with, they were directed primarily, although not exclusively, against women, particularly during the 16th and 17th centuries. Witches were not an alien ethnic religious group like Jews set apart from Christian society, nor were they a clearly delineated alien sect like the Albigenses with a clearly defined doctrine and organization. It is true that witches were accused of worshiping the devil, but not in the same sense that the Marranos, for example, were accused of continuing their traditional Jewish worship. The devil in the mind of the witch hunters was an actual being, and witches were charged with having actual social and sexual intercourse with him. They were accused of feats that were fantastic and bizarre, that contradicted our ordinary grasp of reality, night flights, turning people into animals, and charming away penises and hiding them in birds' nests. We are tempted to conclude that somebody must have suffered from full-blown paranoid delusions. Throughout the Middle Ages, the late Middle Ages, sporadic witch hunts occurred, and as the Renaissance bloomed in the late 15th century, they became widespread. In 1484, a papal bull by Innocent VIII declared witchcraft a heresy and extended the power of the inquisitors to hunt witches in southern Germany. In 1486, the Dominican inquisitors Kramer and Springer published the Malleus Maleficarum, called the Hammer of the Witches, which became the witch hunter's manual for the next 2.5 centuries. Persecutions increased throughout the 16th century and reached their greatest extent and ferocity in the early 17th century. The Salem witch trials in the late 1600s were a localized outbreak that will not be considered here. Estimates of the actual number of witches executed ranges from 100,000 to 9 million. The higher estimates include many who were not officially executed but died in prison. The true number is difficult to estimate, and this fact is less important than an understanding of the climate of terror that was unleashed. Anyone, especially a woman, could be accused of being a witch. Witchcraft was defined as a special crime to which the ordinary laws of evidence did not apply. Jean Bodin, a noted French witch hunter and intellectual, actually favored the use of children as witnesses because they could be persuaded more easily to give evidence against the accused. Once accused, the suspected witch was subjected to torture, such as those in the following contemporary description. There are men who in this art exceed the spirits of hell. I have seen the limbs forced asunder, the eyes driven out of the head, the feet torn from the legs, the sinew twisted from the joints, the shoulder blades wrung from their place, the deep veins swollen, the superficial veins driven in, the victim now hoisted and now dropped, hoisted aloft and now dropped, now revolved around, head undermost, and feet uppermost. I have seen the executioner flog with the scourge, and smite with rods, and crush with screws, and load down with weights, and stick with needles, and bind around with cords, and burn with brimstone, and baste with oil, and singe with torches. End quote. Sometimes torture went on for days and nights, as in Germany, and sometimes it was limited to an hour at a time, as in Italy and Spain. So-called torture was banned altogether in England, where starvation, deprivation of sleep, and gang rape did not count as torture. Whether the accused yielded to intolerable pain and named others, or confessed to whatever her torturers suggested, whether she was mercifully strangled at the stake before burning or burned alive, hung or banished, or whether she committed suicide, accusation meant ruin. In practice, accusations of witchcraft were mostly directed at women in the lower strata of society. Especially at risk were widows, spinsters, and those who were unprotected by a man. When wealthy or prominent persons were accused, the, quote, credibility of the confessions extracted under torture broke down, and influential public opinion began to suspect that the previous confessions did not represent real experience, end quote. The witch hunts then were directed against women as a sex, and against peasant laboring class. The question that emerges in my mind about the witch persecutions is not why, it is why then? Why at this particular time in history did the hierarchies of both Catholic and the newly formed Protestant churches sanction and encourage the prosecution of witches whose interests were served? A society is not a static thing, an object, a single entity. It is a system, an ever-changing network of interlocking relationships wherein the whole is more than, and sometimes qualitatively different from, the sum of its parts. The ways in which necessities and luxuries are produced, the shares of both to which different classes within society are entitled, the level of science and technology, the distribution of power, the sexual arrangements, the child-rearing practices, the individual psychology and ideologies embodied in religion and philosophy and education and institutions, all these shape each other. Interactions among them are not simple. They are nonlinear, circular loops of cause and effect that feed back on one another, acting as mutual pressures and restraints. A change in one aspect of society changes the dynamic balance amongst all its aspects. Other aspects then must change in an attempt to preserve a constancy in the relationship between human beings and their environment so that this relationship will allow group survival. During the 16th and 17th centuries, Western society was undergoing massive changes. The witch hunts were an expression both of the weakening of traditional restraints and of an increase in new pressures. It was a revolutionary time, but the persecutions helped to undermine the possibility of a revolution that would benefit women, the poor, and those without property. Instead, the changes that occurred benefited the rising moneyed professional classes and made possible the ruthless, extensive, and irresponsible exploitation of women, working people, and nature. As part of that change, the persecution of witches was linked to three interwoven processes: the expropriation of land and natural resources, the expropriation of knowledge, and the war against the consciousness of immanence, which was embodied in women, sexuality, and magic. So, I will take a break here, chat, and return later with part 2, or go into detail on these expropriations and the concept of immanence. But as you can see from that little bit, there is a lot of stuff going on today that is directly relevant to the history of this time. So, stay tuned.